it's really important that hosters of virtual worlds know who's in those worlds. It's not important that everybody in the world know who you are, right? But there's this distinction. If something goes wrong, if there's a major incident of something terrible that happens, who did it? If everybody knows their handle, but there's no information about who that person is in the real world that somebody has, like the creator of the world, that's going to be a problem.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of NEWFORUM. I am super excited to have Kaliya Young, also known as Identity Woman, join me on this episode. Kaliya has spent the past 20 years of her career focused on one thing, supporting the emergence of an identity layer of the internet that works for and empowers people. I am super excited to chat with Kaliya about self-sovereign identity, the difference and the intersection between Web3 and decentralized identity. Hey, Kaliya, super honored to have you on today. Welcome.
Hi, great to be here.
So I'm super curious to hear about your journey as the identity woman. How did that start, and what has motivated you to keep you going in the past 20 years? That's a long, long time.
Yeah, it sure is. I really got started when I first met a community that was considering what was missing on the internet. And this community collaborated together to write a paper called the Augmented Social Network White Paper, Building Identity and Trust into the Next Generation Internet. And that group, I had met them after they'd written the paper, and I read the paper, and it totally makes sense. I got all bright-eyed, and I wanted to work on helping them, and had sketched out visions for building distributed social networks using this new identity protocol that they would create. And here we are 20 years later, still working on getting those protocols built, but we've come a very long way. And my handle, Identity Woman, came from the fact that around 2005, Doc Searles was encouraging all of the professionals working in the field to blog about what they were doing. Blogging was not even like a mainstream thing yet. And we all needed good names for our blog. And I was the only woman I'd met in really working on this topic in sort of any all-day meeting I'd ever been in about it. And so I just gave my blog that name, and it kind of stuck with me. So I just went with it.
That's an incredible background, and I really love the name Identity Woman. It really caught my attention. So, open standards for digital identity. What has Identity Woman been doing in the past 20 years, and why are open standards important for digital identity?
That's a super great question. So during the first arc of our community's work, we were tackling key issues about how individuals log into different websites. And when we got started in 2005, to every single website that you went to required you to get a new username and password. And at the time, people weren't really even using email addresses as kind of login identifiers. They would ask you for a username, you'd have to pick one that hadn't already been claimed on that platform and pick a password. Now, this led to people needing to remember dozens, if not hundreds, of passwords, and also being like kind of separate people almost at every place that they went. There was no portable identity for people. And our community worked together on a protocol called OpenID. And the original vision for that was that people would own their own URLs, just like they did in LiveJournal or other blogging platforms. And they could use that URL that they own to authenticate to get logged into another website. This was an aspirational vision for decentralized identity, But it turned out normal users didn't really understand that they owned a URL. The user flows didn't quite work. And they ended up creating the OpenID Connect that we have today, where it's basically every time you see a button that says log in with Google or log in with GitHub or log in with LinkedIn or log in with Twitter, it's using either OpenID Connect or OAuth. These are protocols that we developed. And they're an open standard, meaning they're a recipe that anyone can follow and implement. The challenge with that recipe is it leaned towards users needing to know where they connected to. And so a very small number of large identity providers kind of now own everybody's digital selves because they're using login with Google everywhere. I don't do that, but millions and millions of people do. And so in the last 8 years, we've been working on new standards that we'll get to next, where that can help us break that model of how we log in and also empower people with more attributes. But I think one of the key things to understand is this importance of open standards that are the basis of the modern internet, that we need to continue to innovate in the open standards realm and not allow private companies to do proprietary things, especially around something so important as our digital identity. So examples of open standards that make the modern internet go are TCP/IP, which is for packet switching, which is how packets get from your computer to the other computers and back again. And another example we all use every day is email. There's an open standard called SMTP. So anybody who follows that recipe for SMTP can send an email. And so we're talking about innovating open standards for digital identity so that it's not owned by any one company and it can work for all people.
I want us to talk more about digital identity. What exactly is falling short in today's standards, and what has been in the works to address these gaps? And I guess the latter part of this question would be, where are these standards in terms of market adoption?
Yeah. So I just shared with you some about how the OpenID protocol works, where it phones home to whoever your main identity provider is, and it uses that service to support logging into another service. That also means that whoever is your identity provider knows everywhere you go, and they're disintermediating you from those services. So if you use Google, Google knows where you go. If you use login with Facebook, Facebook knows everywhere you go. And this protocol also has real limitations in that it doesn't necessarily support conveying important information about you. Where did you go to school? What skills do you have? What's your current street address? Those are things that you might want to share with a business that you're transacting with, or an employer, a potential employer, or any number of other things. All it does is prove you control a little bit of an identifier and you can log in with it, right? So the emerging decentralized identity, and also called self-sovereign identity standards, are really trying to take our capabilities of sharing more information about ourselves when we want to. And so I want to just briefly talk about two of them and explain how they work. One, I guess the most important one, is a verifiable credential. And verifiable credentials are signed portable proofs that individuals can be given by, we call them issuers in our system, but think of them as like important institutions in your life, like the school that you went to, or the club that you belong to, or the professional association that has certified you. You could also use it to receive important documents. Like here in the state of California, they recently passed a law that I helped work on to support vital records documents being issued in this format, right? So now you have a way to say meaningful things about yourself. Those verifiable credentials are issued into a digital wallet. And then from that digital wallet, people are able to share them with, we call them verifiers, because they receive their credentials, they go look up cryptographic key material to do the verification process because it's cryptographically signed by the issuer. And so this is where we start getting into the kind of using cryptography in enabling these systems, which is part of what we have in common with Web3 is this kind of use of this public-private key pair magic that can help us do new innovative things. The other standard is called a decentralized identifier. And the reason that this is really innovative and helps us in these new ways is that up until now, the internet, your only choice of identifier came from a private namespace. So if you have a Twitter handle, you're in Twitter's private namespace. If you have a Gmail address, you're in Google's private namespace. If you have a Yahoo address, you're in Yahoo's private namespace, right? Like there's lots of private namespaces that we're in, but ultimately the controllers and owners of those private namespaces own our digital selves, not us. Right? So they can turn off our identifiers at any moment and we have zero recourse. So I've thought about it as like, it's like we have a lot of laws and regulations and norms in the physical world about the autonomy of our bodies and the right to recourse if people harm us. But these digital bodies in these private namespaces, we have nothing, right? So that's one key issue. And the other thing we do have globally managed registries. So we get phone numbers in a global system of phone numbers, domain names. We can purchase one and it's still in this globally managed registry that's ultimately hierarchical. And that if they really wanted, they could take those identifiers away from us. And we also pay rent for those identifiers. If we don't pay our phone bill, we no longer have our phone number. So is it really ours? And so this other innovation is a decentralized identifier, which is a way to create a globally resolvable identifier that you can then anchor into a distributed ledger if you choose. You can also anchor it into the existing web. There's a decentralized identifier method called DidWeb, but it's a breakthrough in terms of supporting alternatives to these private namespaces or centrally or globally managed registries, right? And so decentralized identifier are a core component for issuers to use to express the public key material that verifiers would need, and a way for verifiers to look up that key material using this decentralized identifier, which for the technical among you is a globally resolvable, decentralized public key infrastructure, which is a way to just name specifically the innovation. And the last part of your question, which was talking about where are we in terms of market adoption, we're at the early stages, but there's real projects that are starting to roll out. So U.S. Customs and Immigration will be using this format to complement the physical card that you get when you receive a green card. You will also have the option of picking up a digital version of that card in a digital wallet using the verifiable credentials format. There's also, like I said, the state of California passed legislation allowing counties to issue vital records in the verifiable credentials format. I don't know if any of them will this year, but it's now possible for that to happen. Another place where we're seeing adoption and exploration of the technology is in the financial sector, right? So there's a lot of KYC requirements that are needed, and Circle, which manages the US dollar stablecoin that Coinbase and Center work on, together. They have a project called Verite, that is all about using verifiable credentials as part of the KYC flow for cryptocurrency exchanges. So there's innovation happening in terms of how the standards that we've worked on can be leveraged in these um, emerging spaces, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. Kaliya, it's really interesting that you touch on these topics. I think that creating that awareness is very important because people don't realize that in a way you kind of have control over your physical life to a physical self to an extent, but now everything is getting digitized, right? And so it's really important that we look into that side. And since SSSI aims to pretty much give control to the digital identity by leveraging, let's say, blockchain and other distributed ledger technologies. It resembles Web3 so much, and I'm really curious to know what is the similarities or differences between decentralized identity and Web3.
Yeah. Well, I think underlying our two movements is a motivation that's very similar, right? Like how do people have the ability to um transact with one another without large banking institutions being in the middle, and really have management of their own key material if they want to. I think both of our communities need to work more on recovery and supporting people who don't want to have the responsibility of managing their own keys fully and want support, because I can always go to my bank and get my password reset, right? This is a feature, not necessarily a bug. And I think there's also a motivation to support individuals connecting and potentially socializing. But, to me, I think there's a kind of, I'm not clear that all people want to have all their social activity blockchained, right? So sometimes I hear Web3 folks and I'm like, oh, I don't know that I want to have all those things in public forever. And how do we use these tools in ways that help them do key new things that we couldn't do before, but not necessarily all the things that I hear some people say they should do. I think to get down into specifics of how their decentralized identifiers specifically the and the cryptocurrency addresses are different, is that cryptocurrency addresses are either the public keys themselves or hashes of the public key, and then the individual holds a private key. But you have to keep that private key private forever for that address to be relevant, right? And decentralized identifiers were innovated by people who understood Web3 addressing, and they said that's not good enough. How can I attach a credential for education that I need to use for a whole lifetime, say, like, let's just go with like 100 years, to a cryptographic key that has one private key attached to it, and that's it. And so it's very fragile in a way. And so the decentralized identifier is a very long number, and it comes with a DID document, and that DID document has a public key in it and potentially an endpoint to go speak to the owner of that decentralized identifier at an endpoint. But the public keys are explicitly rotatable over the lifetime of the holder of the decentralized identifier, so that you could rotate your keys and still maintain control of the identifier. And therefore, the identifier is a reasonable anchor for information to be connected to. And so verifiable credentials can be anchored to decentralized identifiers and persist over a long lifespan. And it's that cryptographic kind of agility and rotation that's that's different in terms of our architectural design. And folks like Evan McMullen have been really um, powerful in their communication to the Web3 community about the fact that they actually have these two cryptographic primitives that they can do cool things with: decentralized identifier and verifiable credentials. Another key distinction is that verifiable credentials never go on a blockchain. They're really held by individuals in their wallet and shared, off chain, like as in peer to peer with another entity. Whereas some folks in Web3 are suggesting that the term that they created for it was soul-bound tokens, is that you would post on-chain assertions about people. And the many of the people who I speak with and have thought about the issues of choice and freedom and consent and concerns about safety say that this design is potentially worrisome for how marginalized people would interact if attributes are being posted to ledgers about them. But I think there's a lot of overlap. I know that coming up, there is an event called WalletCon happening before ETH Denver. And there's another half-day event called Did Day that some folks are organizing to raise awareness about the cool tools that we've developed and that could be leveraged in Web3 communities and by their innovators.
Yeah, these are really great points, and it's like sparks a lot of questions for me. Like for instance, thinking about whenever we talk about wallets, immediately people think about blockchain, right? Crypto, right? And also this idea that there are like different types of blockchains in terms of public blockchain, private blockchain, and also a permissioned blockchain. So I'm also like wondering why can't there be that collaboration? Like he said, there's a lot of overlapping. So it should happen, right?
I mean, you asked a really great question. How do we all get along? I think there's a lot of opportunity for the decentralized identity world and the Web3 communities to align and learn from each other. So I think there are key challenges for identity in Web3 that are continuing to be explored. And we have some great tooling, right? So how do we do more mutual learning and education, and how can key problems that Web3 communities need to solve be solved using the work we've already done? I think that's really critical at this time, is to figure out how we connect. A great opportunity, if people are really keen and diving into working with our communities. We gather twice a year at an event called the Internet Identity Workshop. I've hosted that since 2005. We were working on it way before crypto, as cryptocurrencies were invented, right? Like in the way we have them today. So we have this really long and deep history, and we're a very friendly community. And like I said earlier, there's these events that some folks who are at the intersection of Web3 and decentralized identity are working on. And I hope to see more of that. I know I have a lot to learn about Web3. And I think, especially when it gets to places like the metaverse, like it's really important that hosters of virtual worlds know who's in those worlds. It's not important that everybody in the world know who you are, right? But there's this distinction. If something goes wrong, if there's a major incident of something terrible that happens, who did it? Well, if everybody knows their handle, but there's no information about who that person is in the real world that somebody has, like the creator of the world, that's going to be a problem. We also need to really think about age gating and age appropriate uses. So this is another key place that our communities really thought a lot about how do adults express that they are adults without giving away all of their information? Without giving away their name, their address, and all this stuff, right? So we have building blocks to support that happening. And I think we can't just be naive about how people behave in cyberspace. It's just like the real world. There are bad actors, and we need to figure out how to hold people accountable, which is different than saying everybody should use their real name everywhere, or everybody should be forced to use some cryptocurrency address that has 10 soulbound tokens attached to it. Like, that's not the identity we want in Web3. We want this, the subtlety and nuance that will help us enable people's freedom to connect and explore and disconnect from their quote unquote real name and their professional lives in these virtual spaces, but not necessarily have zero accountability because nobody knows who they are.
Well said, Kaliya. Loved how you summarized those thoughts. I think it's very digestible, and I like the word you used, keeping people accountable, because one of my struggles was, I respect that people want to be anonymous, but I used to struggle with that a lot, especially in Web3 and when it comes to identity, like who am I talking to and what's really going on. And I think that we can still exist that way. We can still have our digital identities doing things that, you know, we desire to do or aspire to do, but there can be a way to keep everyone accountable. So really, thank you for sharing those last thoughts. I think it summed it up. And I also want to ask, like, if you have any recommendations or any advice.
I think if people want to learn more, my colleague Lucy and I wrote a course on edX called Getting Started with Self-Sovereign Identity. So that's you know, a really easy way to kind of onboard into understanding the core concepts and technologies. Like I said, there was the conference that I lead, the Internet Identity Workshop. There's a lot of different podcasts and resources online, and I'm a friendly community leader. People are welcome to kind of knock on the door and say, hey, I'm interested in this. Where can I find more or get connected?
Thank you so much for sharing that. Also, if you can tell us specifically where our community can find you.
Well, the good news is it's pretty easy. It's identitywoman.net. That's my, I've also hosted that blog since 2005. It's crazy, right? So that's a good place to find me, and it has more resources. You can click my books and papers and learn more.
Thank you so much, Kaliya. Thank you. You've been doing amazing work, and I'm excited to see what happens this year, you know, with decentralized identity and Web3 and how it all like comes together somehow. And thank you all for participating in today's forum. If you want to get more involved in our community, make sure to follow us on our social platform. We are NEWFORUM_NCO on Twitter, and we will have all the links in the description below. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next episode.